What's going on, guys? Dr. Price with Action Potential Mentoring, and we are going to break down the 2024 ERAS Master Guide that will tell you every single thing that you need to know to complete your ERAS application. And then even a little bit more on top of that, whether it's personal statement, letters of rec, we're going to go through everything, including the new geo preferences, signaling. You're going to get it all right here. So here's all the things that we're going to cover today. You can see over to the far left-hand side of the screen, this is our outline of our talk. It's going to be a lot of information, so get ready to roll. So before we get started, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. On social media, I'm the most active on Twitter. You can find me at action_AP. And here's all my other social medias and email if you'd like to contact. So let's move right into it. Now, before we get started, I want you to know that this guide is meant to be followed simultaneously while you actually fill out your ERAS application. This is going to save you a ton of time. It's going to make the process very seamless for you, and it's going to prevent you going backtracking and then having to fill in the mistakes as you go. So let's get started. Key dates you need to know. June 7th is when everything opens up on ERAS, so you have access to ERAS now. September 6th is whenever you can begin submitting my ERAS applications to programs. That opens up at 9 a.m. The 27th is whenever residency programs are going to begin reviewing your ERAS application and your MSPE. And then in March, that's whenever the match occurs. So those are the major dates that you need to have in the back of your mind. Screenshot that, put it in your calendar, and let's get ready to go. So with looking at these dates, you want to have everything in your ERAS certified, submitted, ready to go before September 27th, when the programs are going to start looking at all of your information. And one thing I like to tell my mentees is that the letters of rec can take up to 12 days to be processed and finalized into your application. So you want to tell your letter writer to have them in earlier than the 27th. I like to tell my letter writers back in the day to submit it by September 1st, because most people run a little bit behind schedule, and this will give you guys both some wiggle room to make sure that you get your letters of rec on time for your application. Letters of rec are the number one thing that holds up most people's ERAS applications. All right, here's a useful link. I'll put this in the description. This is going to be your ERAS timeline link from eras.com. All right, so first you want to log in. Here's the link from my ERAS. That'll be in the description. You're going to get to this screen right here. So this is your dashboard. You're going to see this a ton of times. I want you to get really familiar with it. The tabs up at the top, we're going to talk about them, and we're also going to talk about each of the sections within the application, the documents, and the programs. All right, so that's your dashboard. You can access the various sections of your application tab from the dashboard. So I actually like to click right here where it says application. It's going to have a drop-down menu, which we'll see in a little bit, and it's going to show you all the different sections you need to complete. So this is the easiest way for me. I'm not that great with technology, so I just go with what's the easiest. So the subsections of your application are going to include personal info, your biographic info, which is going to be one of the most important, your education, your experiences, licensure, publications, and then the certify and submit button. We're going to talk about all of these. All right, so on your dashboard, you click the application button and you see this drop down. We're going to go through every single one of these one by one, step by step, as you see over here in our outline for today's talk. So pro tip that I want to drop before we move on, everything from here on out, you want to use a personal email address because your school email address may be disabled at graduation. And not only that, but the servers for school emails are oftentimes bogged down with tons and tons of different students' emails. They don't have the bandwidth that something like Google or a Gmail would have. So I personally recommend everybody to create a Gmail account that they use only for ERAS as well as your application process. Mine was like my name 2020@gmail.com. That way that I remembered that this was just strictly for application season. All right. And before we even get into that, to finish talking about the specific email accounts, what I find is the best way is to put all of your regular email accounts that you already have into your phone's native mail app. And then you put this specific Gmail that you create into the Gmail app on your phone, and then immediately put all your push notifications to ASAP. That way that every single email, every single communication comes through immediately to your phone. You can have friends, family, girlfriends, boyfriends, significant others. They can have access to this Gmail to actually book you interviews faster if you're in a procedural specialty where you might not be able to access your phone as soon as it goes off. So that's a little pro tip for you. All right, personal information section. It's going to look like this. You're going to have these buttons to click through. So just to recap, you're on your dashboard, you go over to application and you click personal information. And you're going to have each of these sections to actually walk through. All right, so most of the personal info section is going to be self-explanatory, but make sure you save your input once you're done. It does not autosave, and it's a massive pain in the butt. I remember losing all of my work whenever I was doing this. Before you do anything else, I want you to go to www.nrmp.org and register for the NRMP match. This is absolutely vital because signing up for ERAS does not mean that you're enrolled in the actual match process. You have to actually do an additional sign up. So do not move forward unless you complete this step. And then don't forget to return to ERAS to actually enter your NRMP ID once you get it. And you're going to put that into your personal information section. And this is so programs can easily find and identify you. For the personal info section, you're also going to need your USMLE ID, your ECFMG if you're an IMG, your NBOME ID if you're a DO, as well as your AOA IDs where applicable. And you're going to need this to complete your personal info section. So make sure you have all of those IDs saved into a notepad on your phone so that you can easily access them at any time. Other data that you're going to need for this additional information tab that you'll see right here on your personal info section is your BLS, PALS, and ACLS certification expiration dates. You want to have copies of those because you need them for residency as well. So when you're in residency and you have to recertify your BLS, your ACLS, or your PALS, whenever you're applying for fellowship or for an actual job, you want to have the expiration dates of your prior BLS, PALS, and ACLS certifications so you can make sure that you get recertified before they expire. And also, if you're in Sigma Sigma Phi or the Gold Humanism Honor Society, then you can also put that into your additional information tab here. All right, so that covers the personal info. That's probably the most self-explanatory part of the entire process. Now we're going to move to the biographic information section. This section is huge and it's really, really crucial. All right, so go back to your dashboard, click on application, and you're going to see the biographic information next on the dropdown. All right, this is the section that everybody worries about with your geographic preferences. You may have seen this chart before. This is the official ERAS chart that talks about the different geographic preferences, whether you want to prefer the Pacific, the mountain, the West North Central, the West South Central, etc. There's a bunch of different groups of states that you can indicate that you're more highly interested in. And so we're going to break down the rules for these geographic preferences and what exactly they mean to you. So these are the criteria that I teach all of my mentees. Under no circumstances do you want to leave the geo preferences section blank. This is critical because some applicants did this out of fear of alienating any programs, and it actually found that it was unfavorable on their match outcomes. So look at these statistics. 56% of program directors stated that leaving the geographic preferences blank indicated to them that the student is less interested in their region or program. That's huge, but not quite as huge as this next stat. 91% of program directors treat a blank geographic preference applicant as less than an applicant in which their region was selected. So they're going to have an unknown bias against you just for leaving this blank, so you might as well fill it in. And we're going to talk about some of the science behind that in just a little bit. All right, so step number 2 with the geo preferences is go hard or go home. If you're going to signify a specific geographic region, list all 3 that you have options for. It's in your best interest after going through all the data. So only 15% of program directors treat the answer no geographic preference as equal to the applicants that are selecting their region as a geographic preference. So unless you're in one of the specialties that I'm going to list below in bullet point number 3, it is generally in your best interest to select 3 geographic regions on your ERAS application. Note, these rules can change from year to year, but based upon the data that's available right now, these are my current recommendations, as well as after speaking with multiple program directors. This is the best way to do it from everything that is currently available to base your decision-making process off of. Point number 3, for specialties that give you over 15 signals to use, and we're going to talk about signals in a little bit, it is generally better to select no geographic preference. Note that this is not the same as just leaving it blank. Putting no geographic preference indicates that you're willing to train basically anywhere. And so a lot of people think that this is the best way to do it. And it is if you're in one of the specialties that has over 15 signals. And these specialties can include derm, neurosurgery, OBGYN, ortho, and ENT. And so the reason why is because if you signal outside of your geographic preference in these specialties, there's so many signals that can actually confound your circumstances. And so You can actually select the geographic preference for these specialties, but only if you actually signal within the 3 geographic preferences that you prefer. So I know that this is confusing, so let's go over it one more time. Number 1, don't leave it blank. That's a no-no. Number 2, if you're going to put a region, put 3. And then number 3, if you're in one of the specialties that has a ton of signals, meaning 15 or more, then you're going to want to either put no geographic preference, or you're going to want to put your geographic preferences as long as your signals coincide within the group that your geographic preference is. So moving on, you do not want to sleep on this section. It's to assist with the application evaluation. Programs will oftentimes even filter applicants based upon their geographic division and preferences, as well as their setting preferences. We'll talk about setting preferences in just a second. And so most program directors, which is 82% of the respondents in a study, they used the geographic preferences section during their selection process and reported that it helped them identify applicants who they might have overlooked without this. So it is helping applicants to get better exposure to program directors. Something that I thought was absolutely crazy, and this is from an NRMP study, 58% of program directors literally shotgunned application interviews to every single person that selected their geographic preference. Now, obviously, for some specialties, this is not going to be the case, but this is what the NRMP has reported. Point E. In the ERAS 2023 match season, many participating programs reported interpreting, "I do not have a division preference," to mean that you're willing to go anywhere. And so that's helpful because it kind of makes it sound like you're a free agent. So you're not giving yourself an advantage, but you're also not losing anything. However, it is important to note that when your applicant's geographic preference aligned with the program's location, the likelihood of an interview invitation was statistically higher than for the people that put no preference. And this is true for all specialties so far from all the data except for orthopedic surgery. And for whatever reason in ortho, the likelihood of an interview invitation was similar for applicants who indicated no geographic preference, or they indicated a geographic preference within the program's region. So for ortho, you can put no geographic preference and basically get the same outcome as if you selected a specific region and applied to the programs in that region. So I personally, if I was applying ortho, I would put no geographic preference. All right, and so the section is going to look something like this. You're going to have these geographic preferences here, and it's going to give you the options of, say, New England, Middle Atlantic, East, North, Central, whatever it is. And you're going to have 300 characters to explain why that you prefer that region. And remember, you can pick up to 3 regions. So if you're going to pick any region, pick 3. And so if you select a particular division, what happens? Only programs located within that division to which you apply will see your response. But what if you say you do not have a preference? You have no geographic preference. Then all programs that you apply to are going to see your response. So if you skip this question, then no information will be provided to any program. So basically, like I said before, you don't want to leave it blank because that's going to tell every program that they're not your preference. But if you actually say, "I do not have a geographic division preference," then all programs will see that. So it's a little bit different. It's a nuance, but it can make a huge difference in getting screened in or out of interviews. So make sure you go back to the 3 rules that I gave you earlier. And so I thought this was kind of funny. The NRMP actually kind of said that, in nicer terms, they basically said that 61% of advisors incorrectly advised applicants how to use the geographic preferences section of ERAS. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then number 12, you're going to have 300 characters, like we said, to describe the reason why you want to stay in a specific geographic region. All right, so now let's talk about setting preferences. So we've covered personal information, biographic information. We've covered the geo preferences. Now we're talking about the setting preferences. This is the last part of your biographic info. And so for setting preferences, you can pick urban, suburban, rural, or no preference. And so if you indicate a preference or a lack of preference for a setting, your preference or lack of preference and corresponding explanation will be shared with all programs that you apply to. So if you do not respond to this question or you skip it, no setting preference information will be shared with any programs. So if you're going to write something here, just know that it's going to go to every single program that you apply to. This one's a little bit more nuanced. The one thing that I found interesting, however, is that only 5% of applicants selected the rural setting. So if you genuinely want to go to a rural training program, this could be the easiest way in the world for you to stand out. Because if only 5% of applicants are putting that, then you can be in the top 5% essentially for the rural program. So keep that in mind. So in a nutshell, with the setting preferences, whether you want to put a specific region, whether it's urban, suburban, rural, or no preference, it's not quite as impactful as your geographic preferences, but just know that it will go to every program that you apply to. All right, so the setting preferences, it's going to look something like this, and you only get 300 characters, just like with the geographic preferences. So here's your little section. You got rural, rural or suburban, suburban, suburban or urban, and then urban or no preference. So that one is more so up to you. It won't make quite as big of an impact as the rest of your application sections. And then something that's newer in the last few years with ERAS is you can actually submit a hometown. And I kind of like this because you can actually submit up to 5 hometowns into ERAS. And per the NRMP's explanation, a hometown is an area where you currently or previously lived and feel strong ties or a sense of belonging to. So if you've been to a bunch of different places across the country, this is a way that you can show that you're willing to move, you're willing to go and explore, and you're willing to try new areas. So it's something that can also make your application stand out. All right, now let's move to the education section. So back on your ERAS dashboard, click on application and then go to education right here. And so my one word of advice for this section is you do not want to skip out on listing your professional memberships, your med school awards, and your other awards and accomplishments. I'm going to show you a screenshot in just a second. We look at this section while reviewing your application. So you really want to actually take the time to submit it. So you have honorary and professional societies, medical school awards, and then other awards and accomplishments. And so since you know that this is part of your ERAS application, if you're a med student that is still early on in the process, whether it's M1, M2, M3, you can actually kind of, rig the system by going after these things so that you have something to fill in on the blanks. You don't want to leave any section blank on your ERAS. So try and get at least one med school award. Try and at least get some other awards or accomplishments. Make sure that you're in some professional and honorary societies. Because at the end of the day, leaving a section blank on ERAS kind of looks like you didn't put in the maximum amount of effort. All right, the experiences section. So you go back to your dashboard, click on application, and you go down to experience. And let's talk about it. This is the section that everybody's been talking about lately with taking away the hobbies section of ERAS. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. So it's going to bring you to a screen that looks like this. You click on add entry and you can submit up to 10 experiences into your ERAS. And once you're done with the 10, you actually select 3 of them that were the most meaningful to you. Keep in mind that the most meaningful experience is different than the most impactful experience, which we're going to talk about below this in just a second. So let's say that you click add an experience. This screen's going to pop up. You're going to put in some baseline information about the experience, kind of like how many hours you did it, where it was at, that kind of stuff. But some of the new options are your setting, your primary focus, and the key characteristic, as well as the context, roles, and responsibilities of the experience. So let's talk about what those actually mean. So these are kind of newer options for you. The setting is going to basically be, was it an urban, rural, or suburban area? The primary focus is going to discuss, was this like a quality improvement project, medical education, wellness, tech, community service, research, etc. It's going to give you a drop-down menu with these options to click. The key characteristics section is going to also be one of the newer sections, which we're going to dive into. So first, let's talk about the primary focus of the experiences. You're going to want a variety of primary focuses. So even if most of your experiences are of the same type, like let's say, for example, medical education, you're all in on that, that's what you focused on, then a lot of your experiences are going to fall under medical education. But you also want to show that they have different primary focuses based upon the role. So for example, let's say that 99% of my application was about medical education as well as work experience. I worked as a CNA for 5.5 years, and that completely changed my life. And then I created my own company for medical education, action potential, etc. So how would I position myself to show that I'm well-rounded despite putting 99% of my time into 2 separate things? So you can highlight a variety of focuses for these experiences. So for example, let's say I worked 2 separate jobs as a CNA over the 5.5 years. In the hospital, I could say that that was more of a public health experience, whereas in the nursing home CNA job, I focused more on improving access to healthcare. So same job, but two different primary focuses. So that's kind of how that you can navigate this system. It's going to really depend based upon what you felt was most applicable to your specific experience. Now let's talk about the key characteristics of experiences. So if we scroll back up and look at the chart, we're now right here at the key characteristics section. We talked about the primary focus. Now we're talking about key characteristic. So the key characteristics, these are things like empathy, leadership, communication, critical thinking, those types of things, the intangibles. And so you absolutely want a variety of key characteristics. And this one is a little bit easier to display a couple different facets of your characteristics and skill set as long as you can back it up. You don't want to say that you had a leadership position if it was like a volunteer event that you only did for one day. Like how much did you really lead in that type of scenario? So just make sure that you can actually back up which key characteristic that you select. And then the very bottom, let's show you back on the picture again right here. Underneath the experience where you have context, rules, and responsibilities, we're going to talk about that. And so you have about 1,000 characters for this section. And so a lot of people just put a huge block of text. I find it easier to separate each sentence kind of with a bullet point so that it's easier to read and it kind of shows some objectives for each point. So for example, I write this in the past tense in third person. If I was going to discuss one of my key experiences, I would say, I facilitated the growth of Action Potential Mentoring LLC through 101 student support, cutting edge study protocols leading to some of the highest USMLE scores in the nation up into the 270s, and over 130 hours of in-depth strategy-focused content for mentees to leverage in order to optimize their medical school experience during preclinical and clinical years. So that's like 300 characters. Put 2 or 3 more bullet points like that, and you've shown kind of what you've done with that experience. Something that I tell all my mentees is you don't want to just say what you did. You want to say what your impact was, how you grew, how this impacted you, and how you impacted others. These are the things that you want to think about because you want to show how the experience is going to make you into a better and more well-rounded resident and eventually a full-fledged attending physician. So don't just say what you did. You want to explain how this is going to make you into a better applicant and a better resident physician. All right. So once you're done submitting your up to 10 experiences, you're going to list which 3 were the most meaningful to you. And here's the distribution of what applicants put as the most notable experiences on their ERAS in general. So some of about 1 in 3 people are going to focus primarily on volunteer or service or advocacy. 17% is for basically medical education. 16% is work. And you guys can kind of read through these charts here. And here are the characteristics that most people highlight when discussing their experiences. Teamwork and leadership is about 1 in 5 of the experiences. We'll focus on that. Empathy and compassion is 14%. Critical thinking is 13%. These are just some ideas for you to focus on as bullet points whenever you're explaining your experiences. All right, so for the most meaningful experience at the bottom. For the most impactful experience at the bottom. So you've already submitted your 10, you've selected which 3 were most meaningful, and now you got to write one that's impactful. So this is different than the top 3 that we just talked about, and I know it's confusing, so bear with me. So this is a totally different section, and they call it the impactful experience section. It's one of the newer things on ERAS. And so here's some examples of what ERAS actually recommends to discuss. They recommend to discuss family background if you're like a first generation to graduate college, financial background if you're from like a low income family or you work to support your family, your community setting, such as if there's poverty, crime, food scarcity, lack of access, those types of things. Educational experiences. So if you took advantage of limited educational opportunities and leveraged that to grow, or if you had limited access to advisors or mentoring, and then other general life circumstances. So if you lost a family member during medical school, if you served as a caregiver while working in medical school, those types of things. So those are really the 5 things that ERAS recommends for this impactful experience section. So I would kind of stick to those if you can. If none of those really rhyme true with you and they don't vibe with you, then, I mean, you can make up your own and you can run with it, but these are the 5 that they recommend. So I would stick within that criteria if you can. And keep in mind, pretty much anything will fit under other general life circumstances. You're going to have 750 characters for this impactful experience. And I know the toughest thing for applicants here is how do you highlight an additional experience that's not already in your personal statement or in one of the 10 experiences above? So I recommend sticking with the 5 examples that ERAS lists if you haven't used that already in your personal statement, and then put your own spin on it if you can. This is not make or break part of your application. It's actually optional. So some people just don't even fill it out, but it's nice to put your own personal tangible spin on your application. And I don't recommend ever fabricating anything, but I also don't recommend just leaving a part blank on your ERAS, because that shows two things: either laziness or lack of effort, which kind of goes with laziness in my opinion, because everybody's got something that's impactful to them. So I would recommend to brainstorm on that and take a few days to think about it, but use your 750 characters wisely on that. And then here's like one of the most asked questions that I get every single day is, I've heard the hobbies section is gone on ERAS. What do I do? Well, there's 2 ways to combat this. Number one, you can list hobbies overall as an experience and then use your 1,000 characters to dive into 2 or 3 of them in the explanation box. That's what I would do. Or number two is you can be ready to discuss your hobbies when you inevitably are going to get asked at your interview. So tell me something about yourself that's not on your application, something you'd like me to know about you. So either option is viable, but I recommend to my mentees to actually use one of your experiences to discuss your hobbies. And a common misconception is that you can only list one hobby as an experience. I recommend just putting hobbies as the experience and then diving into multiple of them in the explanation. That way that you don't seem quite as one dimensional, because this is one of the most important sections here, ERAS. You are going to get asked about your hobbies at nearly every interview. I would say out of my 20 plus interviews that I went to, literally 85 to 95% of them asked me about my hobbies. So I highly recommend including that in your application. All right. So, an important note regarding the hobbies and interests on ERAS: I want you to make this as intense or silly as you want. I've seen everything from goat milking. This was actually from a student that worked on a farm, but she said goat milking, and it was a lot more quirky and attention grabbing than just saying farming. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing is a unique hobby. So something like sundial painting. It doesn't have to be like changing the world and like rowing from South America to North America on a wooden ship to then create some new foundation that raised $10 million for the homeless. Like, it doesn't have to be crazy. It can literally be something just cool. And one of my favorites that I actually got in an application last year was a student that did party cannon development. He's a small business owner. And so the conversation that we had was really unique and interesting. And I still remember this guy a year later because of his hobbies. And it's really cool to kind of start a genuine conversation that way. So do not sleep on the hobbies. All right, so how do program directors use the experiences section? So almost 100% of program directors are going to use this as part of your holistic application review to determine who to interview. So they're going to at least scan through your experiences. 79% of them use it as a tiebreaker to determine who they want to interview. And then 87% of program directors are going to read through your experiences prior to your interview so that they know what to talk to you about. So clearly, these are important. All right, next we're going to talk about the licensure section. So if you go back to your dashboard, click application, and then go down to licensure. So we've covered personal info, biographic info, education, experiences, and now we're on licensure. So this section is pretty quick. If you have a state medical license, you can upload it here. Most people watching this video, which are first-time ERAS applicants, they're not going to have that. And then the remainder of this tab is going to be filled out how I have below here. Obviously, if any of these answers are not true for you, then change it to reflect your application. But most people are going to put yes for the first and then no for all the rest. So that's the licensure tab. And at the bottom, you're going to see there's a spot for a DEA registration number. And you might not have that yet. If you've never been in residency, if you've never graduated med school yet, you're likely not going to have a DEA registration number. So you can just leave that blank. All right, the publications section. So go back to your dashboard, click application here at the top, and then go down to publications. So you're going to have the opportunity to list each of your publications here under one of the following categories. So I'm not going to read all these to you, but you can see them yourself. There's peer-reviewed journal articles and abstracts, there's posters, there's oral presentations, you name it, there's a way to categorize it. So all of your publications and research essentially go right here. All right, let's talk about signaling programs. Everybody is super interested in this section, so hold on one second and we're going to dive right into it. All right. So this is going to be absolutely huge. It's going to be a massive part of your application. And this can literally change the course of your entire life if you utilize it properly. So initial data from the NRMP has showed that the bottom 50% of applicants received a 20% interview boost from signaling programs appropriately. And so it basically shows that the applicants who got the least amount of interview offers are now getting the biggest boost. And so this is awesome. At the end of the day, programs really just want to match someone who genuinely wants to be at their program. So once you're into your signals tab, you're going to see here the saved programs that you have. So if you go back to the dashboard here, you can go over here and click on programs, and it's going to basically show you all the different programs. You can search them by their ID, you can search them by their name, etc. And so you're going to see the programs that you saved. These are the ones that you're really, really highly interested in, and you can send a signal to them. All right, so you go over here to the actions tab right here, and then click the little dots, and then you would say assign signal, and it'll tell you how many signals you have remaining. So how do you know what to do with these signals, how many signals you have, what's important about the signals, etc.? We're going to dive right into that. So every specialty is going to have a different amount of signals. And so the AAMC actually recommended to the specialty leaders and program directors that the number of signals for each specialty should be less than 10% of the average number of applicants and less than 5% of programs in the specialty. So they did some mental math here and they came up with these signals for each specialty. And keep in mind that this can change from year to year, but this is the most updated information that's available. So anesthesia is going to have 15 signals, 5 which are gold, 10 which are silver. Gold meaning it's the higher tier signal. It's like, yo, I really want to freaking come here. And then silver is like, hey, I'm still super interested. Can you consider me? And you can read through all of these yourself. And you see pretty much the largest amount of signals here is with ortho, and they have 30. So keep in mind what I said earlier about with geographic preferences. The reason why that ortho has equivalent geographic preferences versus no geographic preferences is because they have so many signals. Because if you send a signal to a program for ortho, then that means that that's basically you're willing to go there. And so your geographic preferences matters less. So that's why I recommend for programs that have over 15 signals, you can or you cannot put no geographic preference. It's up to you. If your signals are going to be in the same geographic region, you're better off putting that specific region. But if their signals are going to be all over the United States, then just put no preference for the high signal specialties. And so that's going to include stuff like neurosurgery, ortho, ENT, OBGYN, those types of specialties. All right, and so OBGYN, diagnostic radiology, and interventional radiology, derm, and anesthesia are going to have gold and silver signal tiers. And so use the gold signals very cautiously. These are super powerful, and they're an indication that you want to go to this program if you get selected. And so keep in mind that many of the top programs are going to be getting absolutely slammed with gold signals. So a place like Johns Hopkins, for example, every single signal they get is probably going to be gold. So if you really want to give it a shot at a top name program, obviously you're going to want to use your signal there. And you would be better off using a gold signal if you're going to use it at all. So I personally don't really find for most students that it's going to be worth it to use one of your gold signals at an Ivy League program if it's out of your candidacy. So if score-wise, research-wise, if you know that it's kind of out of your reach, it's probably not in your best interest to use a gold signal for that program, because at the end of the day, the goal is to match. Matching matters a lot more than the perceived pedigree of a program. So just because you have Johns Hopkins on your CV, sure, that's awesome. Sure, it feels good. But at the end of the day, what you get out of residency is what you put into it. And so if you always are going to have in the back of your head, you're like, oh, shoot, I wish I would have went for it. I wish I would have signaled them. I wish I would have fired off that shot into the abyss. Then go for it. Use one of your signals at one of those top name programs, but don't waste them all there. So let's talk about silver signals. Most programs are not going to be able to fill their residency class with only gold signals, because keep in mind, most of the upper to mid tier programs are going to be getting a lot of gold and silver signals. And so the silver signals are still really valuable for helping to secure interviews. You don't want to waste the silver signal on a pipe dream type program because they're already likely over inundated with gold signals, and your silver signal is going to get lost in the sauce. So here's a power move, and I recommend everybody to do this. So send a silver signal or just a regular signal if you don't have gold and silver to one of your backup or less competitive programs. And so if you do that, you're going to basically ensure that you are signaling a program that you feel more than qualified to match at. And so this is what I would do personally, because now you have a program that you've already told basically that you're super interested in them, even though your scores, your research, your application, your volunteering, it might be a little bit higher than what has been accepted in that program in the past, but they're going to more than likely give you an interview because you signaled them. And even though you're an overqualified applicant, that's going to give you a foot in the door at a program that they're going to be really excited to have you. And it's a way to basically improve your chances that you don't go unmatched. And so there is a known phenomenon where strong applicants don't match at a super high tier program for whatever reason. They could have had bad interviews. They could have had a bad day. It's a hyper competitive applicant pool. Could be any reason. But they also don't really get interviews at less competitive places because those programs are like, well, why would I give an interview to the 270 guy? Because they're probably not going to come here. We're just a rural program. And that's kind of how program directors and applicants think. So using a silver signal or using a regular signal can combat this phenomenon. So I would definitely take the power move and send a silver signal to a backup or less competitive program. And so for programs with over 15 signal tokens, it's going to be likely increasingly disadvantageous to apply for more programs than you actually have signals for. So for example, anesthesia has 15 total signals. Since there's so many signals, programs are likely going to stray from interviewing a ton of students that don't signal, because why would they? If there's 100 signals to the program and they're going to interview 100 people, then why would they accept somebody that didn't signal them? Kind of is just logic, in my opinion. So this is only true for the high signal specialties. Like a specialty that only has 4 or 5 signals, that's not going to be the case, right? So let's go back up to our chart here. And if you look at thoracic surgery or psych, they only have a handful of signals. And so they're going to interview people that don't signal them. But if you're in a specialty like ortho that sends out 30 signals, they're probably going to interview very few people that don't signal them, just because they've already got shotgunned as many signals as possible because there's so many in that specialty. And so if you don't feel hyper competitive for a specialty such as, let's say, anesthesia, they got 15 signals, it's considered a higher signal specialty, you're probably better off dual applying to another specialty rather than shotgunning 100 applications for different anesthesia programs across the United States. This is just my hypothesis. I don't want anybody to take this as the word, the truth, the law. But if you think about it logically, if a specialty has a ton of signals, why would they offer interviews to people that didn't signal them when there's already hundreds of people that have sent them signals to interview? So keep that in mind. Obviously, if your end goal is no matter what, you want to match anesthesia, then by all means go all in and apply only for anesthesia. But if you're not super set on one specialty, if you're just trying to match, you're trying to play the game as strategically as possible, this is another option. All right, so let's look at some of the NRMP data on signals. So 75% of program directors agreed that program signals help them identify applicants that they would have otherwise overlooked. So this is super useful for us. It basically puts your foot in the door for them. Program directors reported using applicant signals during various stages of the application process. So the 88% of program directors are going to use it as a screening tool before they do a more thorough application review. 61% of program directors are going to send interview invitations to every single applicant who signaled their program. I mean, that's literally huge. Like, that means that almost over half the program directors are literally going to just auto give you an interview if you signal there. Obviously, the top programs like the Johns Hopkins, the Mass Gen, those types of programs, they're not going to give every single person an interview that signals them. It's just not feasible. But for the mid-range tier and then the low-tier type programs, they're going to probably give you an interview if you signal to them, as long as your application is reasonable for their program. And so 91% of program directors are going to use that as part of the process of who they want to interview. And 86% of program directors are going to use signals as a tiebreaker to help them decide who to interview. And that's kind of going back to what I said earlier. If student A sent a signal and student B did not, obviously they're going to go with student A 86% of the time, because student A has already shown that they're very interested in the program. So take this data with you, utilize it to give yourself the best possible chance of matching. All right, so let's talk about the Pareto distribution of signals. So in all specialties except for ortho, about 10% of programs received more than 20% of all signals sent by applicants this cycle. And so it might be worth it to signal non-top 10% type programs to increase your odds. This is what I've been saying all along. Send your signals to mid-upper tier programs as well as the middle tier programs, and then to one backup program. So if your objective is just to match, you can greatly increase your odds by signaling the less popular programs. If your objective is to match to a competitive location, obviously you want to signal within that geographic location. More than 50% of respondents interpreted a blank value for the program signal as the applicant being less interested in that program. Meaning, if you really want to go somewhere, don't just email them and tell them that, signal them. And so here's an important note. The highest chance to match is when your signals align with your geographic preferences. So for programs that used both geographic preferences and program signals, more than 50% of respondents of program directors gave more weight to program signals than to geographic preferences. But when they align, magic can happen. So something important to note that once a signal has been applied, if you withdraw your application from a program you signaled, that signal cannot be reused. So it's gone. So use your signals very, very wisely. And here's a little bit more data of how programs interpret program signals and geographic preferences. So about 1 in 4 program directors are going to consider preferences of your geographic region and signals separately. 21% viewed applicants who reported a preference for the region and signaled the program more favorably. So they're clearly liking that. And 53% of program directors are going to give more weight to program signals than geographic preference. All right. And so this chart right here basically just shows you that in every single quartile, except for the top quartile, based upon interview offer rate, the other quartiles are going to benefit from the signaling process. So signaling process is going to improve the distribution of inequalities across the interviews. There's applicants who got like 30, 40 interviews, and this is before whenever you could barely even take that many interviews because of traveling and stuff before everything went virtual. But now, because everything's virtual, if you got 30 interviews, you could literally do them all over Zoom and it wouldn't be that difficult. So now this is the best way that the NRMP and ERAS has came up with to combat that. So they're distributing the interviews more fairly because of this process. All right, so now let's move to the documents section. If you look at your dashboard in the very middle, there's the documents section. So we've already covered every part of your application right here. We've covered using signals with the programs. Now we're going to talk about the documents section. So we're going to break down the topics of letter of rec, personal statement, the additional documents such as your transcript and your MSPE, as well as your ERAS photo requirements. So once you click on, you're going to go into your documents and click on it. You're going to get to this tab here. And so let's talk about letters of recommendation first. So in order for a letter of recommendation author to upload a letter on your behalf, you're going to have to complete all these steps right here. So you have to make sure that you read carefully. And one thing that I want to explicitly say to everybody, please waive your right to view your letters of rec. There's no reason to view your letters of rec. If you know it's going to be strong and positive, then leave it. You don't need to read it. I personally never read mine, so you just want to leave your waiver as something that you just do not have access to your letters of rec. Program directors are going to find that if you do not waive your right to view your letters of rec, that you might not have been confident that the letter of rec would actually be strong. So if you have something to hide, obviously you're going to want to look at it before you upload it. And so this is not fair. And so program directors look less favorably upon an applicant that views their letters of rec. Keep in mind, you're going to need a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 4 for most specialties. So a way to kind of combat all this is to ask your attending if they will write you a strong letter of rec, and use those words because you want to make sure that it is extremely favorable and it puts all of your best assets and characteristics on display. If the attending is going to hesitate or indicate that they can't make it a strong letter of rec, then it's probably best to ask someone else. And so here's a useful link for some tips regarding letter of rec. I'll put that in the link of the description. And here's some links to send to your letter of rec writer to help them actually write it. And I'll put these links as well in the description. So you want to remind your letter of rec writer that it must be a PDF format. I actually have a PDF compressor link right here for free. They can reduce the size of your PDF files. It needs to be 8.5 by 11 as well. So these are kind of the guidelines. Send this in a polite email to your letter of rec writer and it'll save everybody the headache. So a common question that I get. If you're applying to competitive specialties, something like interventional radiology, vascular, neurosurgery, etc., Is it better to have all of your letters of rec from within that same specialty, or should you have a diverse set of letters of rec from multiple specialties? And the answer is it depends. For competitive specialties, it will be in your best interest to have at least 2 to 3 letters of rec from that specialty, but your last 1 to 2 letters don't necessarily have to be from it. So I personally only submitted 1 vascular surgery letter of rec. Others were cardiothoracic, plastics, and trauma/gen surge. However, if I were to do it again after being on the other side of the application cycle, after interviewing hundreds of students, as well as mentoring over 2,000 students now in the last 6 years, I recommend to my mentees to have at least 2 to 3 within the specialty that you're applying to. This is going to show dedication to the specialty. Sure, can you apply with 1 letter of rec in that specialty? Absolutely. People do it all the time, but it's better to have at least 2 or 3. And so the reason why I personally did so many non-vascular rotations and submitted non-vascular letters of rec is because I personally wanted a well-rounded skill set and to see a bunch of pathology that I wouldn't have seen otherwise during my M4 year, as well as possibly even during residency. So it gave me some nice insights. I felt that it made me into a better future surgeon. And I definitely got comments during interviews from my cardiothoracic letter of rec because it was very similar to vascular, first off. It's an applicable skill set, and also is from a high-powered cardiothoracic surgery director. So it doesn't necessarily have to be your specific specialty, but if you're applying for surgery, you probably wouldn't want to upload like a pediatric letter of rec because that skill set for peds is not going to be that useful for surgery unless you're going into pediatric surgery, for example. So try and make your letters of rec as much carryover as possible. But if you're applying for something like gen surg or IM, where there's a ton of fellowship options, it's actually pretty useful to have a variety of letter of rec writer specialties. This shows that you're open-minded, shows that you're excited to learn, and it shows that you really are there to do it all, So it wouldn't hurt you to apply for IM with a cardiologist writing your letter of rec because that's a fellowship within IM. And at the end of the day, all in all, what matters most is actually what's inside the letter of rec. A personalized, highly impactful letter of rec is going to go a super long way. Honestly, like one of the things that we value most when we're reviewing applicants' information is their letters of rec. If it's somebody that I know in the field, if it's something that is super glowing and it says that you're one of the best students that they've worked with in their last 26 years of their career, that means a lot because an attending is not going to put their name on the line for a student that they didn't feel really put in the work. So keep that in mind. All right, next, let's talk about personal statement. So we're still in the document section. If you look over here at our outline. ERAS is going to give you 28,000 characters for your personal statement. Please, for the love of God, do not use them all. 1 page of Microsoft Word is way more than enough. Put yourself in the shoes of an interviewer. Would you want to read 28,000 characters for every applicant? Obviously not. It's like rereading the Iliad. Like nobody wants to read that much for every single applicant. 1 page is the classic length that I recommend to every single one of my mentees. So if you're applying for multiple specialties, you can upload multiple personal statements. So keep that in mind. If let's say you're applying for general surgery and PM&R, you could have 2 very different personal statements because they're very different specialties. And so that is one thing that you can do. Same thing with your letters of rec. You can assign different letters of rec to different programs. And there's actually like one program that I assigned 1 letter of rec to, and I didn't use that letter of rec anywhere else, but it's because the attending was from that program. And I knew that it would be extremely powerful because his name was on it. So just assign them to the different specialties and programs that you're actually applying for, but make sure that you actually attach it to the right specialty. You don't want to put the wrong personal statement for the wrong specialty. That would obviously be catastrophic and not result in interviews. And point C, I feel like I need to say with all the AI and everything that's around right now with ChatGPT and all the different AI bots, do not plagiarize. The ERAS program is going to investigate any type of plagiarism that they suspect. And so I strongly recommend about being careful with any AI tools that you want to use, because I suspect that the NRMP is going to start to implement AI checking tools in the near future. So be very careful. All right, let's talk about additional documents. So we're still under the documents tab here. Some of the things that you're going to need here is your USMLE transcript, your COMLEX transcript if you're a DO, your MSPE, which your school will upload, your medical school transcript, which your school will upload, and then your ERAS photo. So let's talk about each of those. So thing that you need to know here is MSPE and your school transcript is uploaded by your program. Don't stress about it. They're going to do it. They're not going to screw you over, even though it feels like they're waiting to the last minute. They're going to get it in for you. And you also have to authorize the release of your USMLE and Comlinks and also upload your own ERAS photo. Your school will not do those things. So your ERAS photo requirements, you might want to write these down. The dimensions are 2.5 inch by 3.5 inch. The resolution is 150 DPI, and the file size has to be 150 KB. So where do you get your ERAS photo? How do you do it? I'll kind of give you what I did. So I got my ERAS photo done with a Groupon photographer. I went with my girlfriend. She's now an OBGYN resident. It was super fun. I never had done a photo shoot before, but we did like a boyfriend-girlfriend residency application photo sesh because why not? We had a little bit of extra time one weekend, so we did that. Some keys here to tell your photographer is to make sure that there's no shadows in the background. Doesn't look professional. Even if you're in an awesome pose, you got a good chill look. You want to make sure that there's no shadows in the background. Also, smile. This is a photo that every single interviewer and rank order list team member is going to be looking at. We literally put your photo up on the board while we're discussing you to remember who you are in this virtual day and age. So look inviting, look positive, have good vibes, you know the 9 yards. So let's say you're running super short on time. You don't want to look through Groupon. You just need a headshot ASAP. What can you do? I would recommend to go to either FedEx or Walgreens and ask them to take a passport photo for you. Do this in professional attire. It's like $16 and it will take 10 minutes, and they have pretty solid cameras. This is something that a lot of students do as well. All right, we're on page 29 of 37 here. We can do this. So let's talk about our rank order list. So here's a link. I'll put the link in the description that I want you to watch to understand how that the rank order list works. And so here's some information from the NRMP. This is law. So anything that I say about this, I'll tell you if it's my own impression or if it's my own data that I'm giving you guys. But this is strictly from the NRMP, so it's legit. You have to follow it essentially if you want the best outcomes. So you want to construct your rank order list based upon the preference of programs and not on your perceived chances of matching to those programs. I see a ton of students that change their rank order list because a program calls them and says, hey, we really want you. We want you to be one of our new residents here. We're going to rank you very highly to match. And people will just shuffle around their rank order list, and that doesn't always result in the best outcomes. So you might bump a program up that you didn't necessarily like as much, or they might have not told you the truth, which I've seen multiple times. So make your rank order list based upon where you want to go. I can't say that enough times. Number 2, include a mix of both highly competitive and less competitive programs within your preferred specialty. At the end of the day, you really just want to match. Like if you get to an awesome program, that's phenomenal. I'm super happy for you, but I just want you to match, because matching, you can make really anything out of your residency experience. But if you don't match, then you're kind of in limbo and you have to go through the SOAP process, which is much more stressful, much more strenuous. So point 3 is do not wait until the last minute to enter your rank order list into the R3 system. This is literally from the NRMP. They're pre-telling you that their system gets overloaded and works slowly. So if they're saying this, you know it's best to be careful. Do not wait till the last day, the last 2 days, the last 3 days to submit your rank order list. Do it at least a week in advance. So, important reminder, do not forget to certify your rank order list. I've seen this happen once where a student had all their programs plugged in, but they never clicked certify. And it doesn't mean anything if it's not certified. So you will go unmatched if you do not certify your rank order list. Here's 2 ways to confirm that it's certified. Number 1 is the applicant status field in the R3 system will change from ranking to certified. So that's a good sign right there. Another way is to just check your email. They send a confirmation email to your primary email address on file in the R3 system. And keep in mind that we're using a Gmail for this, not your personal med school email. All right. Can you make changes to your rank order list after you certify it? The answer is yes. But if you change something, you have to recertify it. So please be careful about this, guys. This is how the student didn't end up certifying their ranked order list, is because they changed the position of some programs and then never clicked recertify again. So you have to recertify if you change something. Don't wait till the last minute. Do it at least a week in advance, and don't make any last minute changes to your rank order list based upon emotions. Go with what you know. You have a strategy for your rank order list for a reason. All right. How do you know if you're ready for match day? There's 3 things. Number 1, your user status is certified, your fee status is paid, and your verification status is verified. So if you've done all this on your rank order list, then you're set to match and there's nothing left to do except for wait. And so let's talk about the match algorithm a little bit. So the match algorithm is going to try to put you in the place that's most preferred in terms of programs. So you want to rank the programs in order of your actual preference, not where you think you're going to match. NRMP says this at least a dozen times on their website. So this is their own words right here. Go for your reach program on your rank order list. And so note, this is different from my advice on the signals that we talked about earlier. You don't want to just blow all your gold signals or all of your signals on top 5 or top 10% type programs, because they get a huge disproportionate amount of signals every single year. So, but when you're making your rank ordered list, go for your reach program, put your number one most desirable program at number one on your rank order list. Bullet point number 2, rank only the programs where you're able and willing to train. If you will never go to, let's say, Hawaii, then don't even rank there, because first off, I don't know who wouldn't go to Hawaii, but what I'm saying is, like, if you don't want to go to a state, then don't put it on your rank list, because if you end up actually matching there, you got to go there. And so there are ways around it. You can change residencies, but the NRMP contract basically states that you have to stay at the program for a minimum of 45 days, no matter what. And so there are ways around that. It gets tricky at that point, and I wouldn't recommend it. But if you match somewhere, you got to go there for all intents and purposes. So bullet point number 3, don't even bother ranking programs where you did not interview, because if you didn't get an interview, they're not going to match you. You're not going to be on their list. It's easy as that. And so here's a video, link will be in the description, about how the algorithm works. You really want to watch this. It'll ease a lot of the stress and help you understand the process. All right, so when researching programs, you're going to click on programs, the top tab here on your dashboard, and it's going to bring you to this screen right here. So we already talked about this a little bit when we talked about signals, but we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the research process here. So I want you to use Residency Explorer and Frida to explore each specific program's information. It's going to have the program director, the program coordinator, all the contact information. Residency Explorer is going to show you the demographics, the average number of applicants per year, tons of other data. It's super useful. And so keep in mind, though, that these websites are not perfect. There's going to be a shortage of data for specialties that have less than 100 programs, specialties like vascular surgery, CT surgery, rad-onc, child neuro, IR, developmental disabilities. Those types of specialties do not have a ton of data because there's just much less in the data pool. And so it's useful, though, to have at least a ballpark idea of the minimum score requirements for the program. And keep in mind, not every program updates this. Some programs just put 220 as a baseline USMLE score, and they just haven't updated it for the last decade. But it's still useful to kind of take a look-see, because some programs, let's say they have a minimum score of 245. If you didn't meet that, then you just know it's not worth your time to waste your money applying there. So this is all important, useful information. Residency Explorer and Frida, those are the 2 websites that I recommend. But word to the wise, don't get bogged down with all this intricate data. You don't need to research every single program to an ad nauseum level, because sometimes your gut instinct from your actual interview day is going to be way more powerful than any type of data that you can actually find online. I know dozens of people are going to spend the entire interview season on Reddit, refreshing their tabs, looking at what other people are saying, seeing how many other interviews people have. It's not worth it. The stress does not do anything to benefit you. People online are going to say stuff that's crappy about a program because they want to go there and they don't want other people applying there, and vice versa. So just keep that in mind and take everything that you read online with a grain of salt. If the program looks awesome on paper, but you had a very poor rotation or interview experience there, trust your own judgment. So don't just go for the big name, even though you might have hated your interview day, because if they treated you poorly on interview day, or it was a high intensity pimping culture and you don't like that, then it's probably not a good fit for you. So keep that in mind. All right, some final ERAS tips here. So the first task of importance is getting your letter of rec submitted. So you want to be on top of this ASAP, because it's generally the rate limiting step in the entire application process, because it takes the attendings a while to submit your letters of rec. That's number 1. Number 2, the new signal feature is not used by every single program. However, all the programs that use it are weighing it extremely heavily with the interviews they extend. So signal wisely to places that you feel are within your reach, but at the higher echelon of programs for your application. Don't just signal Harvard because you think it's cool. It's probably not worth one of your signals if you're not a competitive applicant there. But like I said earlier, if you want to shoot off one signal to a pipe dream program, by all means, send it out. Bullet point number 3. I recommend applying broadly across the spectrum of more competitive and less competitive programs. Even with a 260 or higher USMLE Step 2 score, you don't want to apply only for Ivy League programs. Especially with virtual interviews, this is likely going to be the norm for a lot of programs. The most easy to control variable is the amount of opportunities you give yourself. If you apply to 30 places, you're obviously not going to get 30 interviews. You may be lucky to get 10 to 15 statistically. There is no downside to applying broadly or even to multiple specialties if you can muster up enough letters of rec for the specialties, except for the added cost. Obviously, if cost is a prohibitive factor, then you have to take that into account as well. Program directors will not know that you have applied for additional specialties unless you actually tell them. So keep that in mind and take that with a grain of salt. Number 5, there's no reasonable way to search for the right programs without actually interviewing with them and getting the vibe. Anything you read online, let's say you read on a Reddit post from 2012 about a program, chances are the entire department has different faculty by this point. Maybe like 1 or 2 of the attendings are the same. Obviously, all the residents are going to be different, so it's not the same. So you can't just rely on old information. You got to go to the interview. You got to get the vibe of it. Preliminary searching for programs is honestly not a strong use of your time. It makes you kind of feel productive. It makes you feel like you're researching for your future career, but it's usually what students do to put off other essential tasks, such as completing their actual ERAS, which hopefully if you're following along with this video, you're going through it step by step. You're actually completing it as we go. Number 6, I recommend to print your ERAS application in your CV so that you can review it by hand and make sure you didn't miss anything. You can find that button on the bottom of your dashboard. So you're on your primary screen here, go down to the bottom left. You can literally print your entire application out and read it line by line and make sure that everything looks exactly how you want it. So tip number 7 here, when analyzing program directors from nearly 1,000 programs, one thing that I found that was really important is your geographic preferences are rated more heavily than your meaningful experiences when it comes to tie-breaking who to interview. So like I said early on in the video, you don't want to sleep on the geographic preferences section. Use those 3 rules that I gave you to make your best decision. And so my interpretation of this is that program directors can see through a bunch of BS. If an applicant's gassing themselves up, it's honestly difficult to know what's legit, what's not legit. I've read thousands of applications over the last few years, and it's genuinely difficult to stratify applicants based upon their experiences. And so keep in mind that only 15% of program directors are going to treat no geographic preference as equal to the applicants that selected their region as a geographic preference. This is huge, so don't blow it off. All right, here's an unpopular opinion, but I wanted to share it with y'all for full transparency. I legitimately spent under 1 to 2 hours initially researching programs because I didn't even know which ones I was going to get interviews at, and subsequently didn't want to waste the time early on. You get the most useful information about the program through your interactions, through the presentations, through everything on interview day. What I highly recommend to all my mentees is to brain dump all of your thoughts after the interview into a notepad so you can compare the highs, the lows, your thoughts, your vibes throughout the interview season. And what I actually recommend is to keep a list on your phone of which programs you interview at. Just put it in chronological order. And once you're done at interview 1, compare that to interview 2, and then put whichever one is better on top. Then once you get to interview 3, compare interview 3 against the vibe of interview 1 and 2, and then put interview 3 wherever it goes in the process. And so you can basically compare against the prior interviews with every single new interview. Let's say you're down to interview number 10, and you remember that interview number 8 was absolutely awful, but number 10 was even worse. You know that 10 would go underneath 8, but if 10 was awesome, it obviously can make it clear up into your top 3. So just keep a running list like this, and it's the easiest way to do it. It literally makes this process as painless as possible. So keep a running list, compare each interview with the interviews prior to it, and then put them in order based upon that. You don't want to wait to the very end of the interview season to start creating this order, because a lot of students will be like, oh, I just want to see where I'm at and just see every single interview before I start ranking them. No, don't do that. Compare them as you go, because you're going to forget the intricacies and the vibe of the programs if you don't do it this way. And so another tip is pick which level of programs you want to primarily apply to, whether it's community, university, academic, Ivy League. For any of my mentees, they can check the onboarding videos on our members area. I go in depth about all this for the program so that you can basically see which type of strata of program that you are a good fit for, and then apply as your budget is going to allow. So once you get the interview, that's when you actually want to begin considering pros and cons of the various programs compared to each other through the notes that you take during interview day. So I have a ton of interview strategy sessions on our members area for any of my mentees. Trust me, it's not worth your time dreaming about a specific program if you didn't even get the interview yet. So get the interview, then you start considering. Some final reminders here. Once you have certified your ERAS application, it's irrevocably locked and no changes can be permitted. This is different than your rank order list. You can change your rank order list, but you have to recertify it. ERAS, you cannot. So your application, once certified, is provided to all programs that you apply to during the ERAS season. Please take the time to proofread your application so that you don't have any errors, but you can change the personal information section after certifying. That's the only part. So what do I recommend if something new comes up, you have a new research publication, you can't edit your ERAS, so you send it directly to the programs that you applied to. You can literally tell them, hey, I wanted to check in. I just accomplished these 5 tasks. I now have a research publication in this big name journal. I went to a volunteering trip in Guatemala, and now I also am mentoring an M1 student in the process of studying for classes. You can put like all the things that you have accomplished since your ERAS was submitted, and then touch base with the program directors or program coordinators. This is something I did, and it got really strong feedback along the way because they said, hey, like most people kind of stop grinding once ERAS goes in because it's final. So if you can show you're still progressively working on tasks and grinding, you can make a good impression. Here's some general guidelines and timelines to keep in mind. For April of your M4 year, you want to be working on your personal statement, your CV, start polishing it up, have some mentors review it very early on. You don't want to wait till the last minute. In May, you want to touch base with your letter of rec writers and ask them if they're willing to write you one if you have not done that already. In June, you want to follow up with your letter of rec writer, revise your personal statement and CV one last time, start adding all the extra stuff into it that you've done in the last few months, and then start plugging it into ERAS after ERAS opens. For July, you want to complete ERAS, give yourself time to spare so that you don't have as much stress. And then August, you have audition rotations, finishing ERAS, and ensuring your letters of rec are uploaded at the final time. And then September is the official ERAS application deadline. So these are kind of like what you should be doing with each month. Obviously, it's not all inclusive, but these are things that I recommend that you don't skip out on because you want to be as prepared as humanly possible for application season. All right, here's some important links that I'll put in the description of this video. Here's one with some residency data and reports from the NRMP, talks about each specialty. Some other useful links are how to check if programs have any ACGME probations or violations. You want to check that out. You want to see the things that are new in the 2024 ERAS compared to 2023. Here's a link with all that, but I've covered all of it in this video. And then here's all the ways to stay connected again. If you want to touch base with me on Twitter, that's the most common way that I post there every single day, multiple times a day. It's action_AP. There's my Instagram. It's apmentoring.llc. You can check our website out at actionpotentialmentoring.com if you're interested in coaching through this process. And here's all the different websites that I use to build this guide. I mean, this is everything in here is based upon my experience of mentoring and tutoring over 2,000 students over the last 6 years, as well as stuff that I've gleaned from talking with program directors, going through all the NRMP studies, going through ERAS myself. Everything here is what you need to know to complete your ERAS and do it as succinctly as possible to give yourself the best opportunity to match. I genuinely hope that this was useful. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. Check us out on Twitter. Check out the website at actionpotentialmentoring.com if you have any further questions or you'd like some coaching throughout med school. We help you with M1, M2, M3, and M4 year. There's nothing that's uncovered in our program. We literally will walk you through how to prepare for classes, for boards, the strategies involved, how to optimize and biohack your performance, etc. So I hope that this has been helpful. This has been over an hour-long video of going through everything that I think you need to know about ERAS. And share this with a friend. Don't just keep this for yourself. Literally post this in your school's group chats if you have them so that more people are able to get all this information and make ERAS less stressful. So that being said, this is Dr. Price with Action Potential Mentoring, and have a phenomenal day.